Well, for more, let's bring in Laura Blumenfeld in Washington, D.C. She's a Middle East analyst at Johns Hopkins University. Laura, great to have you on the show. So the Red Crescent has rejected the investigation findings. They said the report was, quote, full of lies. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think part of the problem and what they're responding to, in part anyway, is that there have been shifting explanations about what happened that tragic night. And Israel has described it, in fact, as a tragedy, which says a lot. I think the second problem is, aside from the shifting explanations that the IDF has given, is that they've described it in terms of a personal error rather than a collective kind of guilt on behalf of the Israel Defense Forces. What Israel is saying is that the way that they're going to collectively respond to it and pushing back on that kind of accusation that it's just about a personal error with one guy fired, with one commander fired, is that they're going to sharpen those rules of engagement and make it much clearer to the forces operating in the Gaza area and other areas that there should be reinforced protection of rescue workers in the future.
Now, we know the IDF had to backtrack on its initial assertion after that video was recovered from the mobile phone of a medic who was killed. How much of an impact did that have on this inquiry?
Well, I think it undermined the trust, which was already lacking in the first place. They've had to kind of go back and kind of restate what they're finding, and that undermines the trust and credibility. The IDF is trying to show, and Israeli society in general, that they're able to investigate their own army so that it doesn't get turned over to international bodies like the ICC. That's what Israel is trying to avoid, because they feel like those are biased forums, and so that they're able to conduct their own internal investigations. There hasn't been an investigation like this with the kind of censure, not only the firing of one commander, but there's also a censure of another one since last April, when the World Central Kitchen workers were fired on and killed. Again, another tragedy. And it just goes again to show that, until we get the hostages released and a ceasefire, these things are liable to happen, regrettably, on both sides, as everybody states. President Trump did say over a month ago, release the hostages or all hell will break loose. And what we're seeing now is all hell.
Yeah, now, the bodies of the 15 medics and their vehicles were found in a mass grave. Now, the IDF probe says that there's no evidence of execution or that soldiers tried to conceal the event. Do you think this inquiry dispels those claims?
Well, they say that there was a 30-meter distance between the IDF soldiers and the rescue workers who were killed. I mean, will we ever know? I'm not sure. I think what's important, though, to highlight is that the way that the IDF is framing this investigation is it's about errors, not a lack of ethics. It's mistakes, not a moral lapse. And I think that's the position that Israel's taking, and that's perhaps what others are finding offensive, because what they're saying is their whole approach to this war is unethical, and Israel is saying we are among the most ethical armies in the world, and that there's just a really big disconnect between those two positions.
Laura, what happens next?
Well, what happens is that there are over actually 241 investigations right now being conducted on by the IDF on its troops in Gaza alone. 51 of those have been concluded. But for this specific investigation, it's going to move up sort of the next step, which is over to a military advocate general who's going to examine it and decide whether there'll be further action taken or whether this single firing and censure of two officers who they feel like bear responsibility, if that's enough, or whether they need to go and take further actions against those responsible for 15 tragic deaths.
Laura, we'll have to leave it there. Great to have your insights, though. Laura Blumenfeld, Middle East analyst at Johns Hopkins University. Thanks.
Thank you.